Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. The topic of discussion today is Ingmar Bergman's films. We're going to be looking at Shame, which came out in 1968, and the film that he did following that called The Passion of Anna. And both films star Liv Ullmann and Max von Sydow. And we're also going to be overall exploring this element of the more darker sides of psychology and emotions and behavior in people that these films both explore. And my guest today is film YouTuber Nathan Jones, who has an incredible film YouTube channel. Nathan, thanks again for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much, Rob. It's always good seeing you. And to talk about Bergman, this is a good opportunity to jump back into this box set, that I've been meaning to finish for so long, but I still finding ways to explore different sides of him, and I feel like this is a good pairing right here to talk about. So I'm excited today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you become my Bergman partner in crime because it's funny because Bergman is a film director that is written about so much and is so well known, globally. And I don't know many people who know even like film buffs that know his films so well. When Liv Ullmann was in Toronto here 3 years ago, she was here and it was packed and there was a lot of young people. But you're really the only person I know who's and another mutual friend of ours, YouTuber. Cinema Dave also.
Yeah,
Dave, I know he's a fan, but I don't know too many people. So do you remember your first experience of Bergman?
Yeah, actually I do. Actually it was kind of the door that got me into maybe appreciating international pictures a little bit more. I would say. I mean, obviously I had seen films previously before that, weren't in English, but I want to say it was maybe the first year of college. I was in a philosophy class, and this was just the introduction to philosophy class. And I do remember my instructor, who is now a really good friend of mine. Actually, I'm having dinner with him in a week or so. He's remained a good friend for like a decade now. But anyway, he played Seventh Seal. And I wasn't really aware of it. I mean, I think previously he had played The Truman Show. So I was aware of Jim Carrey. Obviously, I had never seen The Truman Show, so I hadn't seen that side of Jim Carrey, or at least the philosophical tinges of that movie. Soliloquism. Anyway, the solitary, whatever that philosophical term that I'm like blanking on that I can't say correctly.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. I'm sure people in the comment section can tell us,
what's the word we're looking for?
Solipsism, I think, is what it is. But anyway, so he played the Seventh Seal, and I was kind of just entranced by it. I mean, I wasn't blown away by it by any means, because obviously this is one of the first things that I ever saw.
Yeah.
But I definitely was like very interested and entertained and very curious about that. And then from there, maybe I would say years later, is when I, started getting into Criterion. I picked up a few films, and one of the first films that I picked up was The Seventh Seal. And I also picked up Wild Strawberries, the other movie that came out in 1957, and which is a really good pairing, by the way, and both excellent films. And so that's kind of my introduction to Bergman, and I still remember it over 10 years ago. So
was there something about the themes and relationships that he explored that interested you? Was there something in specific that wanted you to keep looking at his movies?
Yeah, I think so, because about 10 years ago is kind of when I would say that my faith was questioned a little bit more. And I know that faith is a big discussion to have with Bergman, right? Faith and lack of faith, and it just keep coming in and out of his movies and his characters. And I would say that because of where I grew up, faith is a really big thing here in Missouri, where I live. And I would say that around the teenage years, in high school, when I was kind of exiting my religion, I'm, agnostic now. But at the time, I was questioning a lot. And so this is a film that really kind of pertains more about, death and the afterlife and kind of what do we do to try to, hold off that inevitable end, right? Obviously, that's the basic thing you can get from watching Seventh Seal. But I just remembered like contemplating that and thinking that was a very interesting take on it, and just thinking about time well spent, and then like what we do to bargain for more time, or just more space to like, do we question things that have been given to us for so long that we're so used to it that we start to question these own things, and it just helps us reflect. And I think that's kind of what I started seeing with that, and with his films, is like, these are good films to reflect on, and I really appreciate that, especially coming from my background.
Outside of the faith aspects, was there something else that about his films in particular that you found have interested you more and more, that you have discovered more and more as you go through that box set or see more of his films?
Yeah, so I've always been very interested in fantasy. So like some of my favorite films of all time are like the Lord of the Rings trilogy, or like The Princess Bride, things along those kind of ilk. And I would say that I really like that that Bergman has like a good, like, he's got like flourishes of like putting fantasy or like just dream sequences into his films. And I always think those, like, going back, thinking about those two films in particular, talking about Seventh Seal and Wild Strawberries, both have elements of mysticism to it, or fantasy in a way that I think is really unique. And I always love that. So a lot of those elements were really, really good. And then if I, have been going on this Bergman journey for the last few years, watching some of his older films, and then also films that came after 1957, it's really interesting just kind of seeing these characters and the growth or decline, or these conflicts that keep rising up, and making these things kind of impossible for the people who are living in that very moment. It's like, I like how Bergman kind of lives in the moment of something that, like, well, we have a little bit of context of what happened in the past with these people, and they had probably a good time, and I'm sure there was some build up to like where it leads towards the film, but then we see like the moment that all these things come to head, and this is where the conflict is, and that's what that's kind of what he focuses on some of his films. And I think that stuff is, as an adult now, and more exposure to his films, I would say that's the stuff that I cling on to a little bit more now.
Yeah, no, that's well said. I mean, these very often his characters' pasts not so much come back to haunt them, but they're forced to confront, or someone else is having them confront it. Particularly in the second film, we're looking at The Passion of Anna. One thing you said that I can relate to, because I also saw for the first time, the first film I saw by Bergman was also The Seventh Seal when I was 18. And I also had, I didn't quite, it's not that I disliked it, but same thing, I wasn't blown away by it. I actually had a hard time watching it. It's not conventional, of course, and it wasn't the kind of movies, especially when I was 18, that I was used to seeing. Even if you look at stuff in movies that were coming out in the 1970s in Hollywood, were still very much rooted in grittiness or realism. Whereas here, as you said, he's got these dream sequences. He's got death as a character. So I just the fantasy aspects threw me. But what would you say? The fact that you weren't blown away right away, that you weren't really hooked into it, and my experience was the same. When did you begin to want to go back, want to see more? Was there a certain movie, or was there a certain feeling more so?
Well, I would say that, like I said, like not too long ago, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, is when I kind of went back to Bergman, because I was introduced about a decade ago. But I always had those movies in the back of my mind, or at least The Seventh Seal. And I'm like, I remember watching that movie and saying like, okay, I just don't know if I'm ready for that yet. And as I went through my film journey, and I've been going through it like in my early 20s and late teens, I was watching things like by David Fincher, or watching some Tarantino films, and just kind of exploring a little bit. There's like that next level from a blockbuster to like this is a good film. Not to say that there's that's a whole another conversation.
Yeah,
To
I know what you
enjoy.
mean. From sort of commercial filmmaking to more closer to life
Right.
type of stories. Yeah.
Yeah, so like Francis Ford Coppola, for instance, I would just get into a lot of these films that were like really, really well known, and put up on this I guess cultural pedestal. It's not like it's bad or anything. It's just like these are the things to watch. These are the movies to watch, and then from there, I started kind of, just because I'm just very exploratory in my own nature, just kept going like, oh, and then like I remember watching that Bergman film years ago and being like, okay, well, and then I started collecting. And then once I started collecting Criterion and a few other art house, boutique labels, I started thinking a little bit more about those films that aren't really talked about much, unless, within our communities, we talk about it all the time. But, that's kind of where it all started. And, getting both the Wild Strawberries and the Seventh Seal on Criterion, and then eventually like The Virgin Spring was my next one that I picked up in Persona. I picked up those titles, and all of those just blew me away. And then once this box set happened a few years ago, I was like, I'm ready for it. I'm ready to jump in, because and I still have the individual releases of those films I just mentioned, and I don't want to get rid of them, even though that's me double dipping. But I like Bergman, and I could tell early on that I would still have a relationship with his films, regardless of, at the time, didn't really get it, didn't really pay attention to it as much. But it eventually came around, and I enjoyed what I've done so far with it.
Great. Well, very cool. And that leads us to today.
Mm-hmm.
The next moment of our Bergman journeys.
It's our Shame, right?
So Shame,
mm-hmm.
This is from, and for people who may be confused with the Michael Fassbender, Steve McQueen film Shame, it's not that Shame. This is from
Still haven't
1968.
Seen that one.
Yeah, that's a really great film as well.
I heard it's tough to watch as well.
It is, yeah, it is. And the Swedish translation is Skaman. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but for anyone who hasn't seen it, just a little plot summary. It's in the midst of a civil war. Former violinists Jan and Eva Rosenberg, who have a tempestuous marriage, run a farm on a rural island. In spite of their best efforts to escape their homeland, the war impinges on every aspect of their lives. And again, this stars Liv Ullmann, Max von Sydow, and Siki First, who was another frequent collaborator. I'm sorry, no, that's a different. I'm thinking of the other actor who was the mayor in this. Sorry, Gunnar Bornstrand.
Yeah,
was also phenomenal in this one. So how did you feel about Shame on your first time around?
Yeah, so initially watching it, obviously, like in the first part of the film, definitely feels like it's a Bergman film. It's about a couple. You could tell it's a couple that like they're they can see there's some holes in their relationship, but it looks like they're like trying to work at it a little bit, and they're having conversations about that. And actually, I really find those scenes very pleasant, and also I like that. But then all of a sudden, it just turns into a war film, because obviously, I guess from the opening credits, you get bullet fire, and you hear that.
Yeah.
So it's an intense opening sequence.
Yeah, I love that, because there's no music at all, right? Like it opens with just this like screaming and bullets, and that's like the soundtrack pretty much.
Yeah, and it I don't think we've alluded to it. Well, we probably have, but it really is just it's thinking about what's going on in the world at the time, because the 1960s, around the world is just chaotic.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's really just touching everybody, regardless of. The Vietnam conflict obviously was between the Vietnamese, America, obviously the French. It touched everybody though. And the thing is, because this is in the midst of the Cold War too, and so all of the relationships with these countries, they're still impacted by it, and this is also televised. And so thinking about this as being the first war that's really kind of shown to
Yeah.
people. It's that violence that Bergman, I feel like, is kind of showing in a way, and obviously we'll do more so with, I think, the message of this film. But yeah, it's just going to throw you into, it's like, hey, this is happening right now. And and you can tell, like, obviously in the first 20, 30 minutes, like, obviously people have their own lives and doing their own thing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's things that are bigger than them that are happening and will eventually affect you.
Yeah, no, that's well said, and I think that's what makes it even scarier, because a lot of war films that I've seen are really within a war, where the points of views of the soldiers. So I can't, unless I'm a soldier myself, I can't necessarily relate to it. Or even something as recently as, not in a bad way, I really enjoy war films, or seeing soldiers come home and experiencing PTSD, like American Sniper and Brothers, and films like that. But I think what makes this even scarier is, as you said, in the first 20, 30 minutes, these people are just at home and they're very much in love. And yeah, they have certain problems with, she accuses him of being selfish, and they're talking about whether or not they should have children. And at the same time, though, there is this element of uneasiness and fear. And I love that he has characters often waking up. It starts with them waking up and no one says anything. There's this feeling of unease and anxiousness and fear, just the lack of dialogue, how quiet it is. And even as they go about having pleasantries with people in the city, like you see that with the mayor, played by Gunnar, and then that woman that he's with says one thing that about people being kidnapped or taken away, and no one really knows how to react. They kind of nod as if to ignore it, or to keep up with the normal kind of day-to-day conversations that we have. And then as you start to see the bombs dropping right beside where they live,
yep,
it makes it so much more scarier, because it makes me, there you go. War, does that say War at Home?
Yep, that's the
War at Home. Yeah,
yep, the War at Home. That's literally what it's all about.
Yeah,
yeah.
And
this is the yep.
That's the book inside. For anyone listening to this as the audio podcast, Nathan's showing the book that comes inside the Bergman Criterion box set. And yeah, there's a picture that says War at Home. And that's when I started to think, geez, this could happen anywhere. Wars can break out right where you live. This is not just, far away. And it is happening far away. Syria, countries like that, where these people are, waking up to these traumatic, unfortunate that they're, getting killed and bombs, and it's happening all the time. And you really see that in this film. And that's what, to me, makes it so much scarier, particularly when the enemy, it doesn't even matter that you don't know the details of the war. It's a fictional civil war I took from it. So, you don't know why this war happened, but it doesn't matter, because it's just really about how it affected the people who are not soldiers, just the citizens, what it did to them. And to see them get sort of kidnapped and forced to say something on a videotape, which then, one of their closest friends, because he's a politician, gets a hold of it and knows that it's fake, clearly was, dubbed and it's edited. So it sounds like they're saying that they're collaborating with the enemy. But because of that fear and any hesitation, any suspicion, he had to bring them in. He had to question them, which makes it all the more scarier to think that these people that they were just like probably have had coffee with, dinners, pleasantries, and now they're in a situation where suddenly this guy is like sending people to death and they're witnessing it, or sending them to hard labor. And to then see him, go to their house right after, and he's shaken up and he's scared, and they don't know 1 minute to the next whether they're going to be alive. It's it's quite remarkable. I don't think I've seen a quote unquote war film that makes it so much just about the common man and woman. I mean, did you experience feeling anything I'm saying, sort of land on you as well?
Yeah. So I guess the most contemporary example of this, I mean, this obviously came before this movie that
Yeah,
I'm about to mention, that I watched a few years ago. But Terrence Malick's A Hidden Life is actually, I think, a very good
yeah,
comparison to a
yeah,
film that is just, it's about a quiet community, and all of a sudden the war is knocking on their doorstep, and it really, the war transforms. It's not really about. I mean, yes, the war is the catalyst, but the war really does happen within the home, within the family dynamic, within the couple. Like that's the real war. The real war is the couple battling each other, and like trying to battle for their, I guess, dignity, and also like their true self, and seeing all this pressure put on them, seeing that transformation happen, with both characters. Maybe with Liv Ullmann, she stays the most true to herself despite all of
yeah,
the atrocities that happen. But we see, Max von Sydow's character really transform, even though you saw flourishes of that kind of cowardice, kind of indifference at the kind of the very beginning, where he just isn't really settling on anything. You can tell something's off, like you said. And really, you just see that kind of unfold with that pressure. Drives him to do the awful things that he eventually would do in the film itself. And obviously, Liv Ullmann's character, Eva, she's like, how is this? Is this person I don't recognize that I married? I don't recognize this person whatsoever,
yeah.
because this is a different person.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's true that he really changes for the worse, and she doesn't. She's more um still has feelings for people and compassion and empathy, even when they find that young soldier who's half asleep with a gun, and she's like, let him sleep, and right away, Max von Sydow takes the gun and kills him, because A, he could take his weapon, and B, he finds out where the refugee boat is. So now it's their chance to get on these small boats and get rid of him. So there's more room for them. And yeah, he and it's not meant to criticize him. I think you understand why someone would turn violent under
Mm-hmm.
these circumstances and self-destructive. And even she says, I don't want to go with you, I don't know who you are anymore, and he goes, good, then I don't know, it'll be easier for me to go alone. And I just thought, wow, you see them turn on each other. Even that one scene where there's, after being able to go back home, after being questioned,
Mm-hmm.
outside in the field, they just start to have it out, and just get on each other's nerves so easily. And again, this is where Bergman is interested in where violence comes into people, how violence comes, which is in all of us. And you see
Right.
him begin to hit her, and she hits him back, and the performances are just so incredible. I mean, I think Liv Ullmann is one of the best actresses I've ever seen. I mean, the depths of emotions that she could reach is just incredible. I mean, how did you feel about her and Sydow in this film?
I thought they were both great, and honestly, I actually watched. There's an extra feature on the disc that I have
Yeah,
in the box set. It's a can't remember an introduction to Bergman, I think, is the documentary. It's literally right on the cusp of, as they're making Shame, and they're finishing it up. But it's about Liv Ullmann and Max von Sydow, and like going over to the Faroe Island, and doing Hour of the Wolf and Persona before those, this film here.
that's
And
right.
talking a lot about that. But one of the things that really I think was a very telling of Liv Ullmann in particular was that there was an interviewer. The documentary is American, so she was still learning English a little bit. She's obviously much better now because she's been around it enough. But at the time, 1968, she probably used it sparingly. But
her English is quite good.
Oh yeah,
now, but then she was probably learning.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm talking as an American, who doesn't know any other international language.
Right.
So, but with that being said, though, the interviewer brought up a scene from Hour of the Wolf, which I still haven't seen yet, and I really want to. I've heard it's great.
That's a really good one as well.
But it's near the beginning, and I guess it's like a 5-minute scene that she just is out there. She just wakes up and goes outside and, like she's talking to herself, but she's talking to the camera. And the interviewer talked about, it's like, how difficult was it to shoot that scene? Because, it's a long it's a lot of dialogue. You have to know all this stuff. And she said it was very easy. I actually find the shorter scenes a little bit more difficult because just like being around Bergman, obviously at the time they were lovers, or at least they were together. So I could tell based on that, I just feel like she was maybe more at ease, dealing with these pictures. And with that being said, she just, I could tell that she seemed natural to like learn these lines and then be in the moment and presence. And there's honestly just like, going back to Shame, thinking more, I think we mentioned Max von Sydow, kind of, deviating from, what we had seen him before. I mean, she did it as well. I mean, but she was coerced into it, from Gunnar, the governor, who forced her into this sexual relationship that she wasn't really, fond about being a part of. But there's that one shot in particular at the doorway that Jean Max von Sydow's character had just been crying and upstairs, and he just came downstairs, sat at the stairs right as she and the governor came up to the door, and then she walked in first, saw him there, and said hey, wait here, I'll get your cane. To that, and that scene in particular was one of the best shots I saw from Sven Nykvist, which is the person who's done most of Bergman's. But
he's certainly worth mentioning. The cinematography in his films are incredible. But sorry, go on with what you were saying.
But yeah, just seeing that subtleness in that scene, and then just also the close-ups that you would get in Persona, and then later on in Shame, you can just tell how brilliant she is, and how nonverbal her performances are. And I just think that's incredible that you could see that happening.
Yeah, no, she's stunning to watch. I know, that scene is interesting because, and Bergman was always interested in, it didn't dawn on me until we decided to do these two films, how often he has characters cheat on each other and commit adultery. And of course, Bergman himself was a guy who had many mistresses, was married a number of times, had 8 children, so certainly this was something that he did himself, and that he put his darker sides into his films. And it comes out of nowhere. He's hugging her because of what happened, and then when Max von Sydow leaves, he suddenly wants to be alone with her. And I just think that something happened in the past, and I mean, he doesn't really tell you. And then even when they're alone outside, did they do anything? I mean, Max von Sydow, all he sees is them in the doorway as they're leaving. And so he assumes it's ambiguous. I don't know. Oh, no, but then she also says to him, I haven't been with anyone else. So, yeah, I don't think anything had happened. So do you think anything happened in there? She seems to be pushing him away. I don't know. I know that Max von Sydow certainly thinks something happened.
Well, I think
what you thought.
I mean, even regardless of anything did happen, I mean, it just plays on the insecurities of us. And, I think obviously during this very tumultuous time, there's a lot of things going on. So having the one person that you trust most having to be put in this situation, and, like not knowing if they're going to go through with it, like that's so much pressure and stress on, the anyone really. But I mean, the partner who, that unknown was what freaks us out, especially if it's somebody that we care a lot about. And
Right.
that,
That's a
and
good point.
it really does plague all of us, regardless of the situation. And so I think that is probably, regardless, like I said, if anything happened, it's like, well, that was the last straw of trust.
Yeah,
And so,
and that's a good point about his, obviously, Max von Sydow just totally assumed something happened. Because right after that, the enemy comes and takes the mayor, and um, it was, I thought it was remarkable, those close-ups. Of course, Bergman with those beautiful extreme close-ups on his. I mean, no one can shoot up the human face, I think, better than Ingmar Bergman. And as we saw earlier, he gave them all that money, I think, because he felt so bad about what happened. And when he tells the kidnappers, okay, well, I'll give you money if you'll let me go. And Max von Sydow, what money? He totally, and I just thought, oh my God, like, here's these people, they were just hugging, kissing, and then all of a sudden he's like, he's willing to kill him over not only his insecurities, but the circumstances of this war. That's when you really start to see his character change. He starts to become just unrecognizable, And I think Bergman was interested in those insecurities and in those parts of ourselves that suddenly become violent and become self-destructive and destroy our relationships and personal lives around us, to become really out for themselves, which is why in the 1960s, everything from Persona and onwards, a lot of his characters had those traits of self-loathing and deep jealousies and deep insecurities and willing to be violent and kill. I mean, why do you think he was wrestling with those things? I mean, from what I've read, that was very much the things he himself was wrestling with personally.
right. Well, I think that's it. I think that the thing is, it's personal, and I think that's something that he always had struggled with, because, like you said earlier, he's had many children and many lovers and mistresses and wives, and not to say that, like, like if we're talking about morality, like we can obviously talk about that, but this is something that he's struggling with, and he's trying to put those stories, or I guess some of those extreme examples, onto a film. And I luckily he was surrounded by people who saw that in him, like Liv Ullmann, who continued to work with him regardless, like even after they had been together, because he was just so wrapped up in himself. And that's the thing, that I think with a lot of his actors is, like, regardless, like you could sell, I guess, that he probably struggled a lot with those things, and so regardless, like, he still had a group of close people, even though he wasn't warm himself. He seemed fairly cold in these moments. But it's very interesting. I feel like these are the ways to kind of show that, like, hey, I'm human too, but I struggle with this. So,
Yeah, no, well said. I mean, he certainly is someone who was very self-aware of his flaws,
shortcomings.
And his shortcomings, and as he put it, the good things about himself. I mean, so some people said he was very funny, he was warm, but then he had these tempers and these extreme jealousies and this need for self-isolation. I mean, particularly, this is a guy whose father was abusive, locked him up in closets, and mother who was cold and distant. You can imagine how much that affected him later. And as he said, his personal life was always in shambles, and was partly why he worked so much. I mean, he did like a movie every year, plus like something like almost 200 plays. I mean, he must have just been working and working.
Like, I don't want to think about my own life. I just want to work.
Yeah. But as he said, the things that he necessarily felt that he couldn't control about himself were the things he put in his movies. And you see that for whatever reason, whether it was the war, the Vietnam War at the time, and seeing that be televised almost like entertainment, those or whatever was happening in his life, certainly in the 60s, we see in The Hour of the Wolf, Shame, Persona, a lot of those really darker sides of humanity that I think he did. I mean, they're much more cynical, these movies and bleak, but I mean, there are a lot of things in life that are bleak, so why not show it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's an extraordinary film. Did you have any more thoughts on Shame that you wanted to bring up?
Not necessarily. I mean, I'll probably circle back around when we talk about The Passion of Anna, when we talk about the themes with both and stuff. But it's a great film, and it's one that's very, very, very powerful. So I would definitely recommend it.
Yeah. The only other thing I wanted to mention was this. I was very fascinated by the element of waking up. First thing these people saw as they woke up, even on the boat when they're on the refugees and they're trying to get away, and Max von Sydow in the middle of the night waking up and seeing that one guy just drown himself, and it becoming normal at that point. He just goes right back to bed. I thought that was really he didn't even react, and that they're at one point hitting so many bodies as well of people that I imagine drowned. You can't help but think, I mean, this is like I said earlier, this is happening right now. It's happening, and unfortunately, and I think anyone who criticizes refugees for leaving their own country, you got to watch this movie. If you struggle with empathy, you have a real understanding of why people need to leave, why they need to run and look and survive and have a better life somewhere else. But it's just it's really a film that I was left sort of. It's one of those films that when it's over, you just sit and because it's so emotional, it hits you so emotionally that can't quite speak for a few minutes. It's just jaw-dropping film. Which brings in, then of course his follow-up was The Passion of Anna, which the translation is on passion, which is pretty simple to say. And this is a recently divorced man meets an emotionally devastated widow, and they begin a love affair. This has also Max von Sydow, B.B. Anderson is in this one, and another frequent collaborator, Erland Josephson, who was in Scenes from a Marriage.
I think.
Yeah, sorry. My Swedish is not great.
Neither is mine.
But yeah, and he was also in Scenes from a Marriage. How did you feel about this one?
Also Liv Ullmann. I don't know if you mentioned her.
But, I'm sorry. Did I? Okay, yeah, of course, Liv Ullmann.
Yes, those four, the big four in this film in particular. What was the question?
What did you think of it?
I really quite enjoyed it. This one was, watching it felt once again there was moments of isolation. I would say that I could feel, obviously, from the opening sequence with Max von Sydow's character kind of just living on his own, and then it had elements of like a horror film, to be honest. It had some mysterious killings that are happening across the island that still, at the end of the movie, you still don't know, but
right.
that wasn't really the point. But I think it's interesting seeing this element of trust and isolation really coming to a head, and I think that with this one, it had a lot more layers to it than Shame when it comes to like just the storyline in general, because it had it had more characters, obviously, that we focused on.
Shame is more straightforward than this one.
Right.
Not to criticize Shame, but this is much more of an ambiguous movie, I would say.
Yeah, and this actually, I don't think we mentioned with Shame, but Shame is in black and white, and this one's in color. And this is actually his second film he did in color. He hasn't done it since All These Women, which was like, I think 5 or 6 years previously. So
That's right.
it's very interesting to kind of see him change that dynamic and kind of embrace color, I think, because that's kind of what was, I guess, that transformation into the television stuff that he would do later would
That's
be in
right.
color. Right.
Yeah. How did you feel about the use of color by the cinematographer in this?
I thought it was well done. It
It's quite
really,
striking.
yeah, it's it's bright and bleak at the same time.
Yeah,
Because
it is.
you're so used to watching Bergman in black and white, and then kind of getting thrust into the same kind of worlds that he would build, but with color, like just has this sharpness to the background and the environment that they're in, but at the same time, it's still the bleakness permeates from just the surroundings and also the storyline and the performances. So
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it has a brightness, but yet it's very bleak. It's very cold looking. Even the choice of the wardrobes are, grayish and dark green and red. Of course, the blood from the animals, the red when they're killed, really stands out. I mean, he was always interested in using as much natural light as he could. Apparently, him and the DOP would literally, you probably know this, would literally sit all day and just observe natural light and how to use it. But I think they really lent to the emotions of the film without giving it any kind of artificial look. You can see in Hollywood films how the color really can stand out, not in a bad way. I think sometimes, like something like Michael Mann, like his colors are it's so you can feel that it was the design. Whereas here, I don't feel that it's sort of popping out so much. It just feels very natural. It feels
right.
documentary like. And I think because he was using the natural light also, as much as he could. But this is a little. I saw it a few years ago, and it's a film that it challenges you even more because, as you said, there's a lot of unanswered questions, and he's not giving you. It's not as straightforward and direct as, say, Shame is. So if you're not up for that, it's going to go over your head. And I don't think I realized when I saw it the first time how much it was going to require of me. So, but I do remember liking it, and also just leaving. I remember going somewhere afterwards and just having those images, particularly of those animals like slaughtered in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Like I certainly had the feelings of the film hit me. But when I look at it now, I mean, what do you think he was really exploring here? I mean, what did you take from it?
Well, I mean, just like once again, kind of picking back on Shame, like thinking about the psychological problems that we have with violence. Like there's the physical and the psychological, right? And both of these films have that. That's kind of the overdriving themes. But kind of going back on the animal cruelty and also just killing of animals, like thinking back on Shame, which we didn't mention, there was when the killing of the chickens, which actually happened,
oh right, yeah,
which actually was real, and that's a whole other thing. Is like the older I get, my empathy hopefully grows with me, and I don't really like watching animal cruelty very much.
I was wondering if that was so that was real, eh?
Shit. Yeah. Okay. Well, at least in Shame, I know the killing of the chickens was. But actually, there was a whole behind the scenes thing where Liv Ullmann was not comfortable with that, and they were all just laughing about it, which is they're more anyway, that's a whole thing.
Well, I think we're more conscious of sure. that now, of taking that into taking that into account than perhaps Europe and where they were living in the 60s.
Right. It's a different. I mean, yeah, it's different, and we're a little bit more aware of that, and so. Yeah. But thinking about it in the context of The Passion of Anna, thinking about just like these violent. I think those are just like little because it happens throughout the film, but it's like, kind of like little hints and drops of like what's to come with the real damage that's going to happen. Like it's a lot of the psychological stuff that is, I feel like, happening, it's kind of like mind games that I feel like Bergman's kind of placing into us, is like, hey, there's going to be some fighting coming up, and this warfare is gonna happen too, again, with all these different people, and you don't have anyone to trust, because nobody's a reliable person in this film, because our Max von Sydow is our main character, but at the same time there's something about him that you're like, well, I don't fully trust him, because there's these murders that are happening which we never figure out, but other than that, it's like, like we don't know much about his past. There's like little hints about it, where it's like,
right.
He forged checks, he was in jail, he had done some things, he had an unhappy marriage that didn't end very well, and and everybody in the film, like even where Liv Ullmann comes and has a relationship with him, living alongside him, was in this marriage beforehand, with a husband and a son who was killed in a car accident. And you don't really fully trust her either, because she has this thing in her head where she has this, like, this was my perfect life, now it's ruined, I don't know what to do now, it wasn't my fault. She's kind of living in that moment, and you can't really trust that either. And then you have obviously the side characters of Erland Jofferson and Bibi Anderson, who are also having their own issues with their marital things, stuck in their work and feelings of isolation, and that relationship that not feeling loved. What Bibi Anderson does, not feeling understood. That's where you kind of see that. I know I just went all over the place, but that's kind of where it made me think of. So,
well, you bring up a good point about the animals, because I was struggling to figure out why he did that. So do you think he did that to say that, I'm not going to tell you necessarily by the end of the story who killed these animals, but that any one of these characters could have done it, almost as if you said no one can be trusted, because what we find out about these characters end up being false later on.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that was the point of, was he saying you can't trust anybody? Do you think that's
maybe?
Yeah,
I think maybe. I think that's where I at least that's what I picked up on. I mean, that's kind of just my interpretation of what I saw, is that
well, that's a fair interpretation, and like I said, I mean, I love films that are full of ambiguity, and I think that's quite valid. I should also mention that if anyone watching, feel free to leave a comment or a question in the chat box, and we'll read them off when we get a chance. If you've seen the film, or if you have any questions about it, we'd love to hear what you think of it. But I at first thought, well, maybe he was talking about the senselessness of these atrocities, that we don't have the answers to why things happen. You even see, Max von Sydow says that he was divorced, but then later on it's suggested that in this fantasy, this nightmare he starts to have when he's awake, of a woman appearing, like, who had cancer, and
Mm-hmm.
then he's talking about how cancer scares him, and then you think, okay, so are you saying you got a divorce, but really your wife died? Because
Mm-hmm.
then later on, Liv Ullmann says to him, I know what really happened with your wife, and then
Right, because he found
says
that
to her,
Mm-hmm.
because then she's talking about living in truth, and we had this truthful relationship, and that we had insights and instincts that we followed about who we were and what we wanted to do. And then he finds the letter in her purse earlier in the film, when she stops by to use his phone. She leaves his purse there, and the husband was saying the opposite, was a letters from her husband. So where does the truth begin, and where does the lies begin? So
Mm-hmm.
again, it's cynical, but I think that was perhaps what he was saying about that you can't really truly know anyone, therefore you can't really trust anyone, which is bleak.
Right,
But that's, I think, was him at this time. I mean, what do you think? Do you think that was something he was going for?
Maybe a little bit. I mean, I know that during the making of this film, his relationship with Liv Ullmann was ending, and
Yeah.
like obviously it went amicably, I would say overall, because obviously she returned for scenes of a marriage and still worked with him,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Quite a few
um,
times.
yeah, and so like at least professionally, was amicably. Can't talk. But I don't know. I think he was. I feel like with knowing of how Bergman was living on the island and being more and more isolated, I feel like that was kind of maybe the culmination of a lot of that, where it's like, who is like, how can he trust anybody, per se? Because obviously the older we get, unfortunately, we rely more on the things that we liked in the past, and so anything that's new or anything that challenges that really affects a lot of us. And so, which is why we always hear about, like, well, if you're older, then like you might be clinging to the past way too much, instead of being positive
Yeah.
about it. So, and I think it's just a natural thing that we do. But
Yeah.
I think that's I could see that a little bit with this movie.
Well, that's a good point, because he certainly, I know Cassavetes said something interesting where he felt writing about characters in their 20s is easier because they're willing to take more chances.
Right.
They're more individuals. They will die for the things they believe in. But as we get older, we have more experience, and if things don't perhaps go the way we wanted, we can get jaded, we can get cynical. And you see that with these characters. They all have these, well, at least from what we saw, something traumatic. Bibi Anderson talks about not being able, having a miscarriage, and what that did to her. Early in the film, she says that she didn't want kids. Then she talks about how much that devastated her, this miscarriage, and how that affected her marriage. With her husband, he becomes disinterested in her. It becomes stale. She starts to feel as though she has no self-worth. Again, he's also playing with this element of sleeping, not being able to sleep, nightmares. You see Bibi Anderson sleeping like during the day in her car, just because she passed out from exhaustion because she can't sleep. She can't sleep at night. And even, her husband, Bibi Anderson, I mean, he has this he's like an artist, but then he's criticizing art, and then he seems to just be about money, and all of a sudden, and he's suspicious that there's an affair that happened between Bibi Anderson and Max von Sydow, but he seems to ignore it, or not care as much.
Go along with it, right?
Yeah, and not really care. And some of the criticisms this film got was people said they loved that scene so much where Bibi Anderson and Max von Sydow come together, their mutual vulnerabilities, but that it didn't go anywhere after that. That he just started to have a relationship with Liv Ullmann, and that was it. And I thought, but that's the point, because that happens in life.
You use each other.
Someone.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You use each other. Yeah.
Yeah, someone, and then they're gone. And what else was really going to happen there? Either they just keep this affair up, or at the same time, like Max von Sydow was like borrowing money from this guy, he's like, meanwhile he had an affair with his wife. And I just thought, okay, like, again, he's exploring this element of just selfishness and using people, and also committing adultery. And Max von Sydow does not, he has that one moment of guilt where he sort of moans after Bibi Anderson leaves. You see him kind of lie down and scream out. I took that as him feeling guilty about what he did, but he was happy to then keep taking money from her husband. Did that resonate with you in terms of, do you think that's fair when people said that they should have seen more from that Bibi Anderson story, or do you like that it just left it there?
Well, I guess just thinking about the film overall, I mean, it's pretty ambiguous anyway. So I suppose that it fits naturally with it. I mean, I feel like I've obviously seen the film once, but I feel like seeing a little bit of that breakdown would have been, or at least like that, how they kind of go away from each other. That would have been nice to see, but at the same time, like, it's totally understandable, and I don't think it would have detracted from the message.
No, I love that. I wish I saw that more, because I mean, I don't know about you, but I've certainly experienced dating someone and then just it going away, you know, and
Yep.
you don't hear from them, or you don't want to talk to them. And so I'm guilty of that. And I thought that was really, yeah. we're both Bergman-esque. So I mean, I love that. I mean, I don't see too many films doing that. We always need closure in movies. We always need endings. We always need to be told everything. And I love that he, in this film in particular, he really doesn't. I mean, that was another criticism of this film, is that he was leaving you outside of it. But I like that. Because I'm forced to be involved, and not enough movies do that. How do you feel about the criticism of the monologues in his movies? You know, he has these long as people call exposition. That, you know, it's always goes back to, well, use the medium, show, don't tell. Do you think that? What do you think of him having these speeches that you don't see in? It's more from his theater influence. How do you feel about that?
I particularly like them.
So do I.
Because I mean, you know, there are different. So something like Persona, which is more of a show than tell, right? Which I feel like is probably why a lot of people like really, really love it. But also that's that transition film. But, you know,
he also has some speeches in that too. But yeah,
sure.
Yeah, less so than his other ones.
Less so than, like, you know, Scenes from Marriage, for instance.
Yeah, of course.
But like, at the same time, though, you know, as somebody myself who likes to talk a lot, and honestly, I'm an external processor. So when I discuss these things, I discover them as I'm talking, and I feel like that's probably Bergman. And I feel like that's also one of the things that, like, I have to be doing something in the process, and these characters need to be doing something in the process, and them having these discussions they're coming to their realizations. They're not reflecting on it internally as much. They're expressing themselves emotionally, and seeing that unfold. I think to me, it's like, this is natural, but this is also just how I process things. And so, to me, it's like I can get glued in to, you know, a really great dialogue scene that might have some expose in it that explains some things, but at the same time, it's like, communication is really big, and it's big in my life, and so, like, that's why I like it and I can appreciate it.
Yeah, I know, well said, and I love it too. I mean, I'm a lover of language myself, and I also am come from theater acting. I love theater, and I love Shakespeare. I love Tennessee Williams, Sam Shepard. Like, I love people with distinctive voices, and Bergman certainly had characters who, you know, are something that a big part of what I think art is how life could be, and that if we were able to look inside ourselves and explore our problems and share that with someone, then we can grow. And you certainly see that in his films. I mean, I don't think in this film they necessarily grow, because, you know, Max von Sydow is talking about this freedom he wants, and that he basically hates himself, and he's afraid of contact with people, because as he has this relationship with Liv Ullmann, and everything seems fine, but I think the problem was that there was just nothing between them, and then after a while, they get on each other's nerves. Even when she asks him, "What are you doing today?" and he walks away, you know, and when they find out that their friend was killed himself, you know, that letter that they get from the friend of theirs, and she goes to pray, and he insults her for it. You know, he says that she's acting and she's doing it for herself, and so you don't know if he's taking that as, is he jealous just because she's praying for a man? Like, you know, nothing really happens. I mean, sometimes I'm watching the film, and I mean that in a good way, and I think, what's the problem? You know, but it's because it's themselves. And I know Bergman, again, this is the darker side of where your past comes to haunt you, and because of what's happened to him and whatever happened between him and his wife, he is now afraid to reach out to someone else. Maybe he's afraid to lose her. If he loses her, what's that going to do to him? So he may as well destroy it. Is that what you took from it, or did you take something different?
Yeah, no, I definitely took that as well. But also thinking more of that particular scene, I know he had became more anti-faith at the time too. And so,
Right.
and
Yeah.
he probably also saw that, you know, that act was to him was like, that is a selfish act to do that. And it's more for, you know, our own, like, I guess in his mind, it's more of, this is like assurance or something to make myself feel better, or, you know, or whatever might have been going on with Liv Ullmann's character in particular, because she was living in that truth, right? She was living in this truth the entire time and just kept telling herself, like, this is the way things were and this is how I'm going to live. And with that being said, you know, it's just a projection of that. And I think finally Max von Sydow at least like saw through that a little bit and said, hey, like, well, at least, I mean, he already did see through that with the letter, but, you know, he saw a moment like that would be like, hey, knock that out, like knock that off.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I really like that scene because, yeah, you're right. I mean, it said so much about what, at least, I don't know about Bergman himself. I'm sure what you're saying is true, but also just that character of Max von Sydow having no faith and looking at it as nonsense, and if her doing that in front of him, it just set him off, you know. But wow, I mean, I think it's a really powerful film. I know that Liv Ullmann also considers Hour of the Wolf to be sort of like a trilogy with these films.
Yeah, so that's what Paul was saying. But
yeah. Oh, yeah, yes, Paul Zenev is saying he saw Passion once or twice a while way back, saw Shame twice, once more recently. Did Persona, Hour of the Wolf, and Shame form a trilogy? Oh, I read your mind, or he read my mind. That's
well,
what I was gonna...
maybe not so much Persona, but Passion of Anna would be the if you replace those two, that was the trilogy. But Hour of the Wolf, Shame, and Passion of Anna.
Yeah, yeah, but you know, but Persona certainly has is connected in the sense of self-hatred, you know, guilt, need to be isolated, nightmares. Again, looking at the Vietnam, watch the horrors of how that was affecting other people, selfishness. You know, these are the things that he was grappling with, and I can't think of anyone else who has put that up on the screen better than Ingmar. It's just
go live on an island.
Sorry,
go live on an island and then find out.
Well, and he shot. I mean, you can tell in the Passion of Anna and in Shame that it's the same location, not in a bad way. Yeah. I mean, Cassavetes did that too. I mean, he would use, you know, his house in a few, and you can tell, but you don't care because just because one's in color, one isn't, and the way that it's decorated, the set. But it's man, I mean, you know, when you show that box set, sometimes I'm just intimidated because I mean I haven't seen all of his films. I've seen a number of them. He's made so many movies, but it's more than a film school. It's a mind bender, you know. I mean there he is. He takes you to the deepest, darkest places of the human psyche that I think we all grapple with. And I think we all see this in ourselves. And I think we know people like this. We see this in people all the time, you know, and I think they're fantastic. So did you have any other thoughts, Nathan, before we wrap up?
Not so much. I just wanted to say that these two are alongside Hour of the Wolf, which I haven't seen, by the way.
Yeah, I saw it once. Really, I'm gonna see it again. Really good.
I'm gonna be circling back around and watching it. There's actually the film that comes out before this, actually, because this is curated, this whole box set, and those three films are like in a row. So, but we decided to talk about these two films, Shame and The Passion of Anna. But I do want to circle back around and watch that. And then so just knowing about those psychological and physical conflicts that we're going to have within ourselves and with other people that are in our lives, I feel like that's a good connecting theme with a lot of these films.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Very, very well said. Well, I want to thank those of you who left comments and questions in the chat box. Thank you so much. If this is anyone's first time here, if you're watching this as a replay, or if you're watching live right now and you haven't already subscribed, please do so. It's absolutely free to subscribe. Right beside the description box below, you'll see the subscribe button. Click on that. And then you can also click the bell, which will give you a notification when I go live or when I release a regular video. And I've also been putting this video podcast on audio format, so you can find it on Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and various platforms. If you're on the go and would rather listen to it, feel free to do so. Well, thanks, Nathan. Thanks again so much. I always enjoy chatting in general, but chatting in Bergman is extra special, of course.
Well, thank you so much, Robert. This is a pleasure. It's always good to talk about Bergman, and really, it's just good to talk about filmmakers that can challenge you a little bit, or at least make you think just a little bit more about the things that you're watching. I
agree.
I think if anyone's watching this and has made it this far, these are, like we kind of highlighted earlier, like these are really good stepping stone directors into these worlds that you might like. I think Bergman is a good place to start if you are trying to explore more of like international cinema. I think he's just one of those people that can do it and show it in a multitude of ways. And these are just two examples of some of his good work.
Yeah. Yeah, no, very, very well said. That's a really good point. He is a good place to start if you're interested in foreign films. And these are also on the Criterion channel. If you're interested in getting to subscribe to that, most of that box set is also on the streaming service they put out, which I really, really love. And where can people find you, Nathan? So remind me, it is youtube.com/Nathan Jones, right?
Yeah, well, if you're looking for me, you can go online and in YouTube to try to find me. It's not slash because of I'm just not at that point where you still have numbers and letters in the back half of your YouTube search. But if you just search my name, Nathan Jones, or Nathan Jones Movie Reviewer, that's kind of where people found me. But yeah, you can find my channel there. I talk about movies, just Blu-rays in general, what I've been watching, recommendations, haul videos, etc. But I love talking to other people too. So.
Great. And I'll leave that link in the description box below for people to go check out Nathan's video podcast as well. I should mention, Nathan, you can change that. I think it's only because I was able to put up the URL after just 100 subs. I know you're well above that. So yeah, you can always youtube.com/Nathan Jones or whatever you want to name it. Pretty sure you can. So
I'll look into it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again. And we'll see everyone very, very soon.